the wrestling business for 25 years, we couldn't stand each other. We were at each other's throats. I know it's predetermined all that, but he did not like me, and I did not like him.
Beneath the surface of Roddy Piper's iconic kilt and the sounds of those bagpipes echoing through arenas, there exists a much darker narrative that has begun to unravel in recent years. The weird part? It's being spread by WWE legends, the very people Roddy worked with, and the things they're revealing are so damning, it just might ruin his legacy. Let's get right into it. The dark shadows over an icon's legacy. Roddy Piper, whose real name was Roderick Toombs, built his entire career on being wrestling's ultimate loose cannon, someone who could blur the lines between the fictional world of kayfabe and the harsh realities that existed beyond the ring ropes. His ability to generate intense reactions from crowds was legendary. His talent for working a microphone was genuinely unmatched during his prime years, and his willingness to push boundaries made him appointment television every single time he appeared on screen. However, that same willingness to push boundaries, that same disregard for conventional limits also led him down paths that have now become increasingly difficult to defend or even contextualize within the framework of modern ethical standards. The most serious and disturbing allegation to emerge in recent times surfaced during the September 2025 premiere of a documentary titled Lunatic: The Luna Vachon Story at the prestigious Fantastic Fest Film Festival. This documentary, which examines the life and career of the groundbreaking female wrestler Luna Vachon, who passed away in 2010, contains allegations that have sent shockwaves throughout the wrestling community and forced fans to reconsider everything they thought they knew about one of their most beloved icons. According to wrestling content creator Tyler Williams, who was present at the screening and documented what he witnessed, the film includes testimony alleging that Roddy Piper sexually assaulted Luna Vachon when she was merely 12 or 13 years old, during the early 1980s when she was just beginning her journey into the wrestling business. Williams described the revelation in stark, unflinching terms, noting that a voiceover in the documentary explicitly stated that Piper assaulted Vachon during this vulnerable period of her young life. What makes this allegation particularly complex and difficult to navigate is that Luna Vachon herself, during her lifetime, spoke publicly and candidly about experiencing various forms of abuse within the wrestling industry, though she never directly named Roddy Piper before her death. But the Luna Vachon allegation, as serious and disturbing as it undoubtedly is, represents only one piece of a much larger, more complex puzzle when it comes to understanding the full scope of Roddy Piper's controversial legacy. Throughout his career, Piper repeatedly engaged in behavior and participated in segments that, even by the looser standards of their own time, crossed lines that should never have been crossed. His heel persona frequently relied upon bigoted tropes, racist characterizations, and ethnic stereotypes that generated immediate backlash then and have only aged more poorly with each passing year. Perhaps no incident better exemplifies this pattern than Piper's infamous comments and actions directed at Mr. T during the lead-up to WrestleMania 2 in 1986. During this period, Piper repeatedly insulted Mr. T, the beloved actor and former bodyguard, who had achieved mainstream fame through his role on the A-Team television series, calling him an outsider who didn't belong in the wrestling business and making derogatory remarks about his background and heritage. In the documentary Born to Controversy: The Roddy Piper Story, Piper himself would later admit, with what seemed like only partial awareness of the gravity of his actions, that he said a whole bunch of racist things about Mr. T, opposing his involvement in wrestling, and later dismissing their boxing match at WrestleMania 2 as the worst experience he'd ever had in the ring. Other wrestlers from that era have reported feeling annoyed that Mr. T, a celebrity outsider, was given such a prominent position at WrestleMania 1, and Piper seemed to channel that backstage resentment into his public persona in ways that were deeply problematic. Then there was the notorious incident on a June 1984 edition of Piper's Pit, his groundbreaking interview segment, where Piper insulted Jimmy Snuka by calling him a savage who acts like a monkey, before proceeding to smash a coconut over the Fijian wrestler's head in what has been described as one of wrestling's most shocking moments. This segment, which was meant to generate heat for Piper and establish him as a despicable villain, instead revealed something much darker, a willingness to mock and demean Snuka's heritage in the most blatant, offensive ways imaginable. Many wrestling historians and cultural critics have argued that this incident not only perpetuated harmful ethnic stereotypes but actually derailed Snuka's career trajectory, damaging his credibility and marketability in ways from which he never fully recovered. The segment was even referenced during the 2000 2008 Royal Rumble, but modern viewers watching that footage today see it for exactly what it was, a clear, unambiguous instance of ethnic stereotyping being used as entertainment. Perhaps the most visually shocking and indefensible moment in Piper's career came at WrestleMania 66 in 1990 during his feud with Bad News Brown, whose real name was Alan Coge. In the build-up to their match, Piper painted half his face and body black in what he claimed was an attempt to provoke his opponent, who was portrayed in WWE as an angry character from Harlem, with all the negative stereotyping that characterization implied. During promotional segments, Piper went even further, mocking what he described as Brown's bugging eyes and wide nose, mimicking Michael Jackson, and engaging in bizarre soliloquies where he argued with himself about being part white, part black, in displays that were offensive on every conceivable level. Bad News Brown himself would later call Piper a racist in multiple interviews, explaining how WWE had promised him a major push that would elevate his status within the company, but instead the storyline devolved into this grotesque display of racial insensitivity. The segment was so offensive that WWE eventually removed it from the WWE Network and its successor streaming service, Peacock, in 2021, acknowledging without explicitly saying so that it represented content that had no place being presented to modern audiences. When Piper attempted to explain his actions in 2012, offering the defense that he did it to show that skin color doesn't matter, his explanation was widely and rightfully dismissed as tone-deaf, revealing a fundamental inability or unwillingness to understand why his actions were so deeply problematic in the first place. These incidents, troubling as they were, contributed significantly to Piper's carefully cultivated image as wrestling's most controversial heel, someone who was willing to say and do absolutely anything to generate audience reactions. Backstage battles and burned bridges. Piper's tendency toward unpredictability and his willingness to go off-script manifested in other controversial ways throughout his career. At a TNA event in 2002, Piper stunned everyone in attendance by completely abandoning whatever had been planned for his segment and instead delivering a scathing, unscripted promo where he called Vince Russo the Bin Laden of wrestling, a loaded comparison that would have been shocking in any context but was particularly inflammatory given that it came so soon after the September 11th terrorist attacks. During this same bizarre rant, Piper accused Russo of killing his cousin, Owen Hart, referring to the tragic 1999 incident where Owen Hart fell to his death during a WWE pay-per-view event when a stunt involving a harness malfunction went catastrophically wrong. Piper claimed in various interviews afterward that he had genuinely intended to physically attack Russo during this segment, but was restrained by the Harris brothers, two wrestlers who apparently recognized that Piper was in danger of crossing from worked shoot into actual assault. No one in the production truck or the locker room had anticipated this rant, which shocked the live crowd and highlighted once again Piper's dangerous impulsiveness, his inability or unwillingness to stick to agreed-upon plans, and his tendency to let his emotions override professional considerations. Piper's on-air segments also frequently escalated into what appeared to be genuine violence, even when directed at non-wrestlers and celebrities who weren't trained to protect themselves or roll with the punches in the way that professional wrestlers had learned to do. He kicked Cyndi Lauper and body slammed her manager during a 1984 event at Madison Square Garden, an incident that generated enormous publicity for WWE, but also raised serious questions about the appropriateness of such violence, even in a staged environment. At WrestleMania 2, his boxing match against Mr. T ended in disqualification after Piper threw illegal blows, suggesting that either the match had been poorly planned or that Piper had once again decided to deviate from what had been agreed upon beforehand. In a particularly bizarre incident on the 1989 Primetime Wrestling program, Piper beat up Bobby Heenan, who was dressed as Santa Claus for what was supposed to be a lighthearted holiday segment involving children, completely ruining what should have been an innocent, family-friendly moment and turning it into something uncomfortable and inappropriate. At WrestleMania 5, he sprayed Morton Downey Jr., a television personality, with a fire extinguisher, another instance of violence that seemed to serve no real purpose. Beyond Piper's apparent need to physically dominate anyone who appeared in his vicinity. While these incidents were justified at the time as simply generating heat for his heel character, in retrospect, many of them crossed lines from performance into what looked disturbingly like unscripted aggression and bullying. Beyond the public controversies that played out on television screens, Piper's backstage behavior created numerous conflicts with his peers, establishing a reputation as someone who was difficult to work with, unwilling to follow established protocols, and obsessively protective of his own position on the card at the expense of younger talents or anyone he viewed as a potential threat to his status. He repeatedly clashed with other wrestlers over booking decisions, particularly regarding his well-documented refusal to lose cleanly on television, a stance that frustrated everyone from fellow main eventers to mid-card performers who were supposed to be elevated through victories over established stars. This unwillingness to do the job, as losing cleanly is referred to in wrestling parlance, became so problematic during his 1996-1997 run in World Championship Wrestling that it directly contributed to conflicts with wrestlers like Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, two of the company's biggest stars and most influential backstage voices. These conflicts ultimately led to Piper's release from WCW in 1997 and subsequent lawsuit against the company for unpaid contract money, a legal battle that dragged on and further damaged his relationships within the industry. Hall and Nash, in various shoot interviews conducted over the years, have been quite open about their issues with Piper, describing him as egotistical, difficult, and unwilling to play the political games that were unfortunately necessary to navigate WCW's chaotic backstage environment during that period. Piper's most famous on-screen rivalry was undoubtedly with Hulk Hogan, the man who became the face of professional wrestling during the 1980s boom period and who remained the industry's biggest star for well over a decade. However, their real-life relationship was far more complicated and strained than their on-screen chemistry might have suggested. Piper openly admitted to feeling jealous of Hogan's success, believing that he himself was the superior entertainer, the more talented performer, and someone who deserved equal or greater recognition than the man who had become, synonymous with wrestling itself. This resentment manifested in various ways backstage, including instances where Piper would deliberately sabotage planned spots during matches, refusing to sell Hogan's signature leg drop finishing move properly during house show matches throughout the 1980s, behavior that frustrated Hogan and tested the patience of promoters who were trying to present coherent, believable storylines. According to various accounts that have emerged over the years, Hogan reciprocated this animosity by using his considerable backstage influence with Vince McMahon to work against Piper's pushes, ensuring that Piper would never quite reach the absolute pinnacle of the company in the way that Hogan himself had. This backstage maneuvering and political warfare between the two biggest stars of the era contributed to Piper's decision to take a hiatus from WWE in 1987, stepping away from the company during a period when he could have and arguably should have been making the most money and achieving his greatest success. The animosity between Piper and Hogan reached a genuine physical confrontation following WrestleMania I in 1985, an event that should have been a celebration for everyone involved in professional wrestling's crossover into mainstream entertainment. During the tag team match that served as the show's main event, Piper legitimately injured Mr. T, cracking his ribs through what appeared to be unnecessarily stiff work, sparking chaos and anger among everyone involved in the production. According to comedian Erica Nicole Clark, who happens to be Mr. T's daughter and who shared this story during a 2025 stand-up routine, when Piper visited Hogan's hotel room later that night to offer what Piper apparently thought would be an apology that would smooth everything over. Hogan, who was reportedly high on cocaine at the time, completely lost control, physically attacking Piper, throwing him against the walls of the hotel room and smashing a mirror during what devolved into a genuine, unscripted brawl between two of wrestling's biggest stars. By the time both men had moved to World Championship Wrestling in the mid-1990s, enough time had apparently passed for tensions to ease sufficiently that they could work together again in what the company hoped would recreate some of the magic from their WWE glory days. At Halloween Havoc 1996, Piper achieved one of his career highlights by defeating Hogan cleanly in a steel cage match, AAE, victory that held enormous significance given their history and given how rarely Hogan agreed to lose definitively to anyone during this period of his career. However, Hogan would later claim in various interviews that this clean loss was merely a one-time favor, something done to help WCW's business rather than any acknowledgement that Piper was his equal or superior in the ring. Their face-to-face promotional segment at Starrcade 1996 was noted by fans who were present for containing an undercurrent of genuine tension and animosity, with both men seeming barely able to contain their real feelings about each other, despite being required to work together professionally. The most infamous backstage incident of Piper's later career occurred during his World Championship Wrestling run, when his explosive confrontation with Kevin Nash escalated from professional disagreement into genuine physical violence. During a May 1997 Monday Nitro main event, Piper no-sold Nash's offensive maneuvers, refusing to react appropriately to Nash's attacks and botching planned spots in ways that made the match look sloppy and unprofessional, infuriating Nash, who was one of the company's top stars and a member of the influential New World Order faction that was driving much of WCW's creative direction and business success at the time. After the match concluded, Nash confronted Piper in his dressing room, leading to a physical altercation where accounts differ depending on who's telling the story. Piper's version of events claims that he charged Nash, executed a leg dive takedown, and threw him out of the dressing room, making himself sound like the dominant force in the confrontation. Nash's account, told in various interviews over the years, suggests that he attempted to slap Piper but ended up tearing his quadriceps muscle when he fell during the scuffle, an injury that would sideline him and cost the company money and momentum during a crucial period in the Monday Night Wars. Security personnel had to intervene to separate the two men, and the brawl effectively ended Piper's immediate push within the company, with creative having to scramble to adjust storylines around both the real-life injury and the backstage heat that had been generated. Piper's relationships with other top stars of his generation were similarly troubled and complicated. His interactions with the Ultimate Warrior during the late 1980s in WWE were marked by Warrior's inexperience as a performer clashing with Piper's veteran sensibilities, though their conflicts never escalated to the same level of physical confrontation that characterized some of Piper's other backstage feuds. Piper reportedly lobbied actively against Warrior's rapid rise up the card, viewing him dismissively as an untrained musclehead who hadn't paid proper dues or developed the fundamental skills necessary to deserve such a prominent position. During their house show series in 1988, Piper was accused of deliberately working stiffly with Warrior, hitting him harder than necessary in what Warrior's autobiography described as an attempt to either teach him a lesson or simply express frustration with having to share the spotlight with someone Piper didn't respect as a peer. A legacy under scrutiny in the modern era. The broader question of how Roddy Piper's legacy will be remembered and evaluated by future generations has become increasingly complex as we move further into the 2025 landscape, where cultural attitudes toward accountability, representation, and ethical behavior have shifted dramatically from the standards that prevailed during Piper's prime years in the 1980s and 1990s. The September 2025 revelation regarding Luna Vachon's alleged assault has accelerated conversations that were already happening within wrestling fan communities about how we should reconcile our affection for performers from earlier eras with the increasingly clear evidence that many of them engaged in behavior that we now recognize as deeply problematic, harmful, and in some cases, potentially criminal. For older fans, particularly those who experienced the peak of Piper's career during their own formative years, there's often a strong desire to defend what they remember as his edgy persona, to contextualize his controversial moments as simply being products of their time, and to argue that we shouldn't apply contemporary standards of acceptable behavior to evaluate actions that occurred decades ago under very different social norms. These defenders will point to Piper's undeniable charisma, his revolutionary approach to promos and interviews, his ability to make audiences genuinely despise him in ways that created compelling television and drove ticket sales, and his status as one of the architects of professional wrestling's mainstream breakthrough during the 1980s rock and wrestling era. However, younger audiences, particularly Gen Z viewers and millennials under 30 who have come of age in an era of heightened awareness around issues of racism, sexual misconduct, and abuse of power, tend to prioritize ethical accountability credibility over nostalgia, refusing to give historical figures a pass simply because everyone was doing it, or because the behavior in question occurred before contemporary social movements raised awareness about its harmful nature. This generational divide has created increasingly polarized views within wrestling fandom, with one camp arguing for nostalgia and context, while another demands condemnation and consequences, creating conversations that often generate more heat than light and rarely result in any meaningful consensus. The cultural sensitivity gap between Piper's era and our current moment has become particularly evident in how modern fans evaluate his racist segments and ethnically insensitive storylines. Younger fans, who have been raised in an entertainment landscape that increasingly prioritizes diverse representation and authentic portrayals of people from various backgrounds, view Piper's 1990 blackface segment with Bad News Brown as utterly indefensible, rejecting any attempt to contextualize it as simply heel work or generating heat for his villainous character. A November 2025 post on X criticized WWE for airing a 1980s racist promo involving Rocky Johnson during a NXT Black History Month segment, labeling the decision tone deaf and arguing that it alienated black viewers who were supposed to be celebrated during that month, not reminded of the industry's ugly history of racist characterizations and stereotypes. Surveys conducted throughout 2025 have shown that approximately 60% of wrestling fans under the age of 25 report being less likely to idolize or celebrate problematic legends from earlier eras, even when those performers were undeniably talented and influential within the context of professional wrestling's development as an art form and entertainment medium. This represents a significant shift from previous generations, who were more willing to separate the performer from the person or to forgive personal failings in light of professional accomplishments. WWE's institutional response to Piper's increasingly controversial legacy has the potential to significantly influence how future generations remember and evaluate his career. But thus far, the company has taken an approach that some critics describe as incomplete, inconsistent, and insufficiently accountable. The company has removed certain particularly offensive segments from its streaming platforms, including the Bad News Brown blackface match, which was scrubbed from Peacock in 2021 and has not been reinstated as of November 2025. However, this selective removal and censorship strategy has been criticized by some commentators who argue that simply erasing problematic content from official archives while leaving it easily discoverable on YouTube and other third-party platforms creates confusion rather than education. Unlike Hulk Hogan, whose own racial controversies led to his temporary removal from the WWE Hall of Fame in 2015 before his eventual reinstatement after a period of public contrition, Piper's Hall of Fame status has remained intact throughout all the controversies that have emerged, though the Luna Vachon allegation has sparked online petitions calling for a review of that status. By October 2025, a Change.org petition had gathered over 5,000 signatures demanding that WWE at minimum address the allegations publicly and potentially consider whether someone facing such serious accusations should continue to be honored in the company's official Hall of Fame. Perhaps more telling than official institutional decisions has been the market response to Piper's controversial legacy, with retail data from the NPD Group indicating that merchandise sales featuring Piper's image and branding declined by approximately 15% during the third quarter of 2025, a period that coincided with the premiere and subsequent discussion of the Luna Vachon documentary. This decline has been attributed partly to younger consumers who practice what's been termed ethical consumerism, making purchasing decisions based not just on product appeal, but on the values and behavior associated with the brands and personalities those products represent. WWE's conspicuous silence regarding the Luna Vachon allegations, maintaining a policy of not commenting on the documentary or its contents, despite growing pressure from both media outlets and significant portions of the fan base, mirrors in some ways the company's response to Piper's controversial 2003 HBO Real Sports interview about drug abuse in wrestling. However, in 2025's far more transparent and accountability-focused cultural climate, this kind of institutional silence is no longer interpreted as professional discretion, but rather as protectionism and complicity, actively eroding trust with younger, more progressive segments of the audience who expect organizations to take clear ethical stances on serious allegations rather than hoping controversial stories will simply fade from public consciousness if ignored long enough. The broader reckoning within the professional wrestling industry regarding its treatment of women, its historical tolerance of racism and discrimination, and its complicity in creating environments where abuse could flourish unchecked, has positioned Piper's case as emblematic of larger systemic failures rather than the isolated failings of a single individual. No matter how high profile or influential that individual might have been, the generational divide in how fans evaluate Piper's legacy can be observed clearly in online discussions across various platforms. Older fans, particularly those over 40, posting on forums like Quora, tend to defend Piper's use of racial stereotypes as simply effective, heat-generating heel work that was standard practice during his era, arguing that judging these actions by contemporary standards represents unfair historical revisionism. However, younger participants in these same discussions counter that regardless of intent or historical context, Piper's segments reinforced harmful stereotypes about various ethnic and racial groups, contributing to real-world prejudice and discrimination in ways that extended far beyond the boundaries of sports entertainment. This ongoing debate about evaluation and remembrance has manifested in measurable ways when examining anniversary tributes and commemorative content. Data analysis from Pro Wrestling Stories indicates that engagement with Piper death anniversary tributes declined by approximately 20% in 2025 compared to previous years, suggesting that public reverence for Piper may indeed be fading as newer, more critical perspectives gain prominence within wrestling fan communities, and as younger demographics constitute an increasingly large percentage of the overall audience consuming wrestling content. However, it would be inaccurate and incomplete to suggest that Piper's legacy has been entirely rejected or that no positive aspects of his career remain celebrated. Despite the controversies and growing criticism, Piper's unscripted charisma and innovative approach to promos continues to influence contemporary wrestlers, with many modern performers citing him as an inspiration for their own character work and microphone skills. Social media posts from wrestling podcasts, such as content from the OVP podcast in June 2025, continue to praise specific matches from Piper's 1994 run, demonstrating that wrestling historians and serious students of the craft can still find value in analyzing his in-ring work and contributions to professional wrestling's evolution as a performance art. Merchandise collaborations like Roots of Fight's Villain Collection, featuring Piper's imagery, continue to sell relatively well among nostalgic buyers from older demographics, particularly baby boomers and Generation X fans who remember watching Piper during his prime and who maintain affection for the character he portrayed despite growing awareness of his personal failings. This suggests that Piper's commercial value and cultural resonance hasn't completely dissipated, even as critical reevaluation of his legacy intensifies. The ultimate question facing fans, historians, and the wrestling industry itself is how to navigate this complex terrain where undeniable professional accomplishments coexist with deeply troubling personal behavior, and where the entertainment value of past performances must be weighed against the harm those same performances may have caused. Piper's legacy appears destined to bifurcate along generational lines, with older fans remembering him as a flawed but revolutionary pioneer who helped establish many of the conventions that professional wrestling still relies upon today, while younger audiences increasingly view him as a cautionary tale, a reminder of an era when entertainment industries operated without sufficient ethical guardrails or accountability mechanisms to protect vulnerable individuals from abuse and exploitation. For wrestling fans navigating this complicated landscape, perhaps the most honest approach involves neither wholesale condemnation that erases Piper's genuine contributions to the industry, nor uncritical celebration that ignores or minimizes serious allegations and documented instances of harmful behavior. Instead, a nuanced understanding that acknowledges both his innovative professional work and his problematic personal conduct might represent the most intellectually honest way forward, allowing new generations to learn from wrestling's past mistakes while still appreciating the artistic innovations that helped shape the medium into its current form. Thank you for watching this video. If you'd like to watch another fascinating video like this, click on one of the boxes on your screen right now.